And I experienced that probably 4, 5, 6 years ago, when at the height of what we call success in America, I was experiencing, and I'm grateful for it. But I woke up literally, I woke up one day and all of a sudden, any fuel that I got from ego was no longer there. There wasn't even a space to fuel with that. And the things that felt like wins before no longer did anything for me. Some of the driving goals, factors in what I was trying to do, I wasn't driven by anymore. And I was like, uh-oh, I feel an existential crisis coming on.
Well, welcome to God is Better Than You Think. So glad you're watching. I'm coming to you right next to my children's tent fort, because this is the only place in my apartment that has good lighting right now. See? So, today we're going to watch an interview with, I got to do with Chad Bruegman. Chad helped found and grow one of the biggest megachurches here in the greater Denver area, one that's still very influential, reaching a lot of people. And yet, a few years ago for Chad, he began to have a crisis of faith that ended up causing him to leave his church. He started asking questions that just didn't comfortably fit within what we would consider to be traditional evangelical Christianity. And he's someone who, in a lot of ways, has gone on the same journey that I know I have been going on, and that I think a lot of you have been going on. But how he's able to articulate that journey and the stakes of what it cost him are really, I think, make watching this really profound. And especially for those of you who maybe are going through your own struggles right now and having your own crises of faith, or wondering, is Jesus on the other side of all this deconstruction I'm doing? I really hope you take time to watch this today. It's a great interview. As always, please subscribe to this channel. We have a lot more interviews coming up soon, some I'm really excited to tell you about soon. And also, I have another podcast that's going to be starting in the next month, so get ready for that as well. Enough of me. Let's get to Chad.
You sound delightful.
All right.
A gosh darn delight. How are you, man?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Oh, man, I'm doing... How am I doing? I'm doing all right. You know, I'm doing okay. It's something that you and I have talked about before. The life of someone who is kind of a freelancer who's making money gig to gig during COVID. It's not ideal. It's not what I would prefer to be doing, probably.
Yeah, it's sucking here too, man. And and I'm really bad at it too. I'm not designed to freelance.
The hustle of it's not fun.
Hustle. I'm not a hustler, man.
Yeah. It's so funny because
I wish I was in this season. I wish I was.
You don't read that way. Like, in the times I've been around you, you come across as someone who's this very like, let's grab the bull by the horns, let's get it done type. But it's kind of relieving actually for me to hear you say that, because I'm not. It's like, I'm a communicator. I'm kind of like, I got that temperamental artist nature, I guess, and like the grind and the like commitment to like, no, I've got to get myself out there. I've got to like do the work when it feels so fake and artificial sometimes is hard.
So hard, man. You're speaking my language. Like, I'm definitely convicted and opinionated, and I'm principled, but I'm not driven the way a lot of opinionated. And so it's a weird mix when you have all this in you, and then you're a communicator, but you don't want to hustle to have that outlet. And then there's the whole, providing piece, which is a whole nother thing. And clearly some downsides to working in the local church, but the upside was
zero downsides.
Yeah, zero. It's totally so smooth and easy. And
it's easy.
The upside though was I had all that. I didn't have to. I mean, we had to hustle when we planted the church, but it was a different kind. It wasn't a self-serving hustle at all.
Yeah.
It was an organizational hustle, and we're young and idealistic, and really I call it divine naivety. I think there's a good kind of naivety, and we had it, and I think all entrepreneurs need that when they're young. It's just
sort of that blind faith in yourself, right?
Yeah, and you haven't lived enough life to think you can't do anything, and there's a time for that under the sun, and I don't regret it at all. But you grow out of that. If you grow at all, you grow out of that.
Hmm.
And you have to find a new fuel that is less ego driven and a lot of times less idealistic. And I'm still in the valley of going, God, what's that fuel? Because right now I need it and I don't have it.
Chad, you just articulated something. You articulated that problem in a way I don't think I've ever been able to put words to. I know exactly what you mean when you say all of that. That made so much sense to me. I wonder, because sometimes I wonder, it's like, is the answer to recapture? This is not, by the way, at all what I was planning on talking to you about, but I'm in. Is part of what we need to do recapturing some of that almost naivety of like, God could do anything could happen, but with the wisdom that we've acquired along the way? Is it possible to even have both of those things?
Yeah. And that's exactly the season I'm in. I'm wanting, the optimist in me wants to say, of course it is. And then the realist in me comes back with, yeah, but I'm older and tireder. And, I have to work through, I'm not, ego is not altogether bad, which is what I was taught from birth, which was ego bad, God good. And there's no, and then I started reading more Catholic fathers and mothers, and they had a space for ego that we didn't necessarily have in the evangelical Protestant world growing up. And so what I've gathered and what I'm learning and what seems to fit where I'm at is that it has a place, especially earlier in life. And it's, we'd all still be cavemen and cavewomen if we didn't have ego. And I don't think anyone wants that. And so there's a certain drive that ego brings, but at some point it's got to be put to bed or put to rest, and something better has got to be resurrected than ego. And I experienced that probably 4, 5, 6 years ago when at the height of what we call success in America, I was experiencing, and I'm grateful for it. But I woke up literally, I woke up one day and all of a sudden any fuel that I got from ego was no longer there. There wasn't even a space to fuel with that. And the things that felt like wins before no longer did anything for me. Some of the driving goals, factors in what I was trying to do, I wasn't driven by anymore. And I was like, uh-oh, I feel an existential crisis coming on. Uh-oh. And I didn't plan on it. It just happened. And so here we are.
I like that. That's the way that you articulated that moment of like, I feel an existential crisis coming. No, dude, everything you just said, my goodness. Yeah. Do you think, what were some of the precipitating things that led up to that? Like, do you know, like what led to that moment of you just all of a sudden being like, all the stuff that's been driving me so far, I'm not into it anymore?
Well, I think part of it was I want to say this, lest I sound just like a horrible human being / horrible Christ follower. I did everything genuinely for the glory of God.
Yeah.
And I incorporated some of that into doing things for the glory of Chad. And both those coexisted. And I think every human would be lying if to some degree. And so I don't think that shocks anyone right there. But the best part of my heart was I'm doing this for the glory of God and for the advancement of the kingdom of Jesus. And then there's this sub part of me, but equally me, that's like, of course I'm doing this for my ego. I'm doing this to prove the American point, which is I made it, and to show my high school friends that I don't even talk to anymore, in case they follow me on Facebook, look, here's some quantifiables. And then you spend a lot of time putting out certain signals to the world that you live in, that you've made it and that you're a success. And then all of a sudden that all of those quantifiables were so unimportant to me all of a sudden, and I wasn't prepared for it. So I'm sitting there going, uh-oh. And I did not realize how much I was being fueled by ego, and not just, to use, and I know a bunch of you, I want to honor the fact that a bunch of your listeners don't have the Christian faith. A bunch of your listeners will be neck deep in the Christian faith, and a bunch of your listeners will probably be maybe deconstructing right now their faith. And so I'm going to use faith language because I'm a faith person, but I want to know that I have such honor and respect for every one of your listeners, no matter where they're at on the spectrum of belief or lack of belief. And so I probably should have said that up top, but
no, you're good. We'll backtrack on a bunch of things here in a second.
okay. So anyways, I all of a sudden, here's what happened too, is our church got really big, and it reached a point where I was able to be in my lane like never before. Like, when we started the church, we were the janitor, we were the preachers, we were, running the kids minute, all the things we weren't qualified to do. You just do it. And then as the church got really big, we have 130 staff members. I was blessed to be for a few years, just in my lane. And with that came a new degree of margin that was going to create some holy trouble for me. Because when I had my head down and was just going at a fast pace to try and lead and manage a really fast growing church, I didn't have time for the big existential questions that I think every soul should have to wrestle through on this side of the grave. I didn't have time for it. And I probably will look back and see a lot of grace in that. But what happened was when that holy margin started to come into my life again, I started all the cognitive dissonance, like that part of my engine in my brain, it just like shut down. It broke. Like I didn't have room anymore to stuff in the back of my mind all these big existential questions. And all of a sudden, I found myself in my early 40s asking big questions that I thought should have, especially by an evangelical pastor, should have been solved a long time ago. And then it's like, uh-oh.
Uh-oh, I feel an existential crisis. Yeah, I think a lot of people are familiar with the concept of someone having a crisis of faith or midlife crisis or losing their faith who is just this average person. I don't think we expect our pastors to experience that. What was it like for you as a pastor to all of a sudden realize, like, I'm starting to ask questions that I really would prefer not to be asking right now?
Yeah, it was scary. It was awkward because I had felt, and I don't want to blame anyone that doesn't deserve it, and I don't know who deserves the blame, so I'll just take it on myself. But I at least was under the impression by my congregation, and I love so the church I've been a part of, first of all, best 14 years of my life. And what made it, all the things that made it beautiful, what made it most beautiful was the people. So if any of my people end up listening to this, this isn't a slam on them, but I felt this pressure, like pastorally, that I feel very defensive now, isn't necessary, and also can be toxic if we're not careful. But I felt this pressure to have a degree of certainty that the average parishioner coming in didn't have, almost as if, hey, we're paying you and trusting you to talk to us authoritatively and with a degree of certainty that we ourselves can't walk into this sanctuary with, because this is a crazy world that we live in. And for all the reasons we come here to worship, one of the things we either explicitly or implicitly want is someone leading us in the direction of certainty. And I get it. I say that with so much grace, not as an indictment, and if there's ever been a time where you wanted certainty more, it's in 2020 when everything's going wrong, right? Like the year of COVID, where 2020 is now a joke. Like we use it like when you say a 2020, am I right? Everyone knows.
Yeah.
It means it's just something bad just happened. And so I was feeling this pressure that I couldn't hold up under, which was to give you authoritative answers about things that I don't feel authoritative at all on. I'm asking them privately. I'm not sure I believe that necessarily.
Did you know that's what was happening as it was like, so as you're growing this church, because I mean, dude, everything you're saying is just striking this really deep spot in my heart. How conscious were you aware of that need to provide certainty? Was that something that was really living on the surface, or is that something you were feeling behind the scenes and you weren't even like really conscious of the fact that it was there?
I think I felt it subconsciously since the day I signed up to be a pastor. And I never had any voices. And again, I loved a lot of the voices in my life. throughout ministry, and so I'm grateful for them. But one of the conversations that was never had, the permission that was never given, was permission to sit in any kind of mystery or sit with any kind of nuance. It was the era of belief being maybe the highest order of the Christian practice, was making sure what you believe is right. And I don't think anyone would have said that, but it was implied all the time. And there was this a subconscious peer pressure that you better know all the time what you believe, and then there's some proof text or these certain verses, I could quote them right now, that would reaffirm why you need to be ready to give an answer for the hope you have in, and I'm like, well, I can give an answer for hope, but I can't give an answer for how old creation is, or whatever else you want to know, why a loving God, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that a lot of that stuff, there's a reason we've been asking those questions for thousands of years. Yeah. And the great philosophers have been arguing over them, and theologians for thousands of years. They're the big questions. And I've always been, Josh, so comfortable sitting in mystery. And I've always been in environments where mystery was not even remotely in the top 10 list of things that are sacred to God. And that was causing problems for me as I got older. Because
sorry, go ahead.
No, as I was getting older, I was finding more awe in God via mystery than I was via doctrine. I mean, like I don't want to say doctrine's a good thing, but the mysterious side of God was never a problem to me. I tried to make it a problem in my later 20s and in my early 30s, because a lot of the camps I was running in at that time to try and grow in God didn't make room or space for mystery. And in fact, in a lot of subtle or not so subtle ways, they mocked mystery, and they quickly came against, well, it's a slippery slope, mystery, and I'm like, well, it kind of causes me to worship.
Yeah.
And so when something causes you to worship God, I don't think you should want to let go of that.
I wonder how many people in ministry are currently experiencing some version of what you've experienced, because I know absolutely to some extent this was what I was experiencing when I was in full-time ministry, is we're almost, without realizing it, we are pitching a faith that is different than the faith we ourselves are actually living in. Like, where it's like you said, it's like the church's job is to bring certainty, and yet in our own personal lives we're so uncertain, we're so afraid. So for you, what was the tipping point where all of a sudden that went from being this thing internally to it becoming something that started changing your life?
Yeah, I mean, it's been probably the last, especially I'd say 4 years, but it got really consequential in the last 2 years.
So tell me about that.
So the last 4 years is when I really started feeling this, like, okay, there's enough inertia in what's happening in my heart that I can't avoid it anymore. I can't use cognitive dissonance anymore to throw that in the back of my mind, because it's not convenient to the mission I'm on. It was all of a sudden trying to become in the mission. Instead of getting in the way of the mission. And yet I'm sitting here going, well, this is an incredibly inconvenient time to go through this, because I'm helping lead a church with really big consequences now. And personally, professionally, pastorally, the consequences now, because of just the size of it, were getting really big. And I was like, this is the absolute worst. Why couldn't I go through this in my 20s when the consequences of my actions meant next to nothing to hardly anybody? And why couldn't I have, but it just wasn't in the cards for me. And then a couple years ago, I started asking, really tough questions about my own faith, my own religion, about Christianity, about theology. And I started realizing, I don't know that for the first time as a pastor that this is appropriate to flesh out with my people publicly. And so You mix that with, I had an incredible amount of fatigue and unhealth, and it was self-inflicted. It was just, I think, the nature of the megachurch era that it will eat you alive if you don't practice a hyper amount of discipline when it comes to all areas of health. And not everyone can do that all the time. And that's why I think we see an incredible amount of debris and pastoral fallout from just fatigue. Like, I had a mentor, and she said this to me all the time. She said, when fatigue walks in, faith walks out. And, you know, in this mega church era where we also happen to live in a capitalist country where, you know, time is money and money is time and all that, any organization, including the church world, will eat you alive if you let it. And I let it. And I don't blame anyone for that. So when you mix the fatigue factor in my soul with some existential crisis and theological midlife crisis that I was going through, I stepped away. And some days I'm like, yeah, that was great. And then other days I'm like, what did I just do? You know, because I loved the people, I loved the staff, I loved the church. My family members and best friends all still work there. So, and then other days, you know, but then I'm also a person of principle and hopefully integrity. And my wife and I prayed long and hard about it. And what felt integrous to us was this is something I need to work out privately before I come back and talk publicly. And so we've been doing that for a couple of years.
I would love to hear.
Spiritually, it's been amazing, and practically, it's been awful.
Sorry, it's not funny, but it's so true to what I've experienced that it feels kind of funny. I'm like, oh, thank God, someone else understands. Oh my God, yes. Okay, so I have a lot of questions, but one of them, what were some of the questions that you were asking that were so sizable that you were feeling like maybe I shouldn't even be a pastor while I work through some of these things? Like specifically, what were some of the points that you were hitting up against where the evangelical church you had really helped create and the questions you're asking just didn't line up?
Yeah, that's a great one. And I mean, it's even, Josh, if I'm just being honest, which why not? We're here. Let's be honest. I even get a bit of anxiety with that question, and it's the right question, and it's the good question. It's a question we shouldn't be afraid of, but there's so much instant judgment I found in just mentioning the issues. It's like as soon as I say them, I'm putting an instant category almost, and it's one that I don't want to be in. I just want to be a human who's on a faith journey and really wants to love God with all my heart and love my neighbor as myself. That's what I really want. And I feel like the rest of life can work itself out around those two things. And the leader of my faith happened to say that the rest of life will work itself out around those two things. And so I almost hate even getting into the weeds of this, but I think it matters. And I'll tell you why. Because some of them will seem like important and some of them will seem like, really, you're going to get that? You're going to make that many sacrifices for that issue? Why? But it speaks to me, all the things that I was started to ask, it speaks to the greater good of God's character. And that's what I'm deeply passionate and defensive about, is God's character. And so, for example, the longest standing question I've had theologically that's been burning in me the longest, and this is since I was a little kid, was I never understood the most traditional doctrine and view of hell in the evangelical teachings. That was the one at the most, you know, like, it's good to go back to your childhood and kind of think about what you most organically thought about, because kids just get right to it. They just get to the heart of it without all of the BS around it that we carry into adulthood. And so it just did not match the God that I heard about most of the time. And then I would hear about a God who wanted to torture people forever because in 60 to 80 years, they got him wrong or guessed him wrong or were born in the wrong place. And so it was like the ultimate punishment doesn't match the crime. And then I'm hearing about this God of grace and endless kindness and mercy and love. And then I'm hearing about a God, though, that says, but if you don't get it right with all of the factors it takes to get it right on this side of eternity, all of the potential roadblocks in the way of getting Jesus right, here's what you get. You get to burn without those fires ever quenching you for an eternity. And I'm like, I can't buy that.
Yeah, not just that you don't get the good thing, but that God then punishes you with everlasting torment of like, how do I wrap my brain around that?
Yeah. And I didn't know how to articulate it. I didn't have any theology wrapped around it. I would talk a mean game, but I would have zero clue what the Bible actually said about the potential doctrines of hell. I didn't know there were other options because, you grow up in your echo chamber, you grow up in your denomination, you grow up in your world, and your neural pathways are formed. And that's a little more powerful biologically than we even think. And to break those down, and give them an opportunity to travel in different spaces is harder than we think sometimes, just biologically, more or less spiritually. And so I just put that one in the back of my mind and said, hey, I can play that game as long as I can keep doing my job well, and I'll just never preach about hell, and I'll never really talk about it unless I'm forced to, and then I'll find a way to be very vague about it and move on, because I don't really believe it.
Yeah.
I just don't believe it. So that was the first and the biggest one. And it can almost seem like, yeah, but you're going to go to war over that, or you're going to quit your job over that. And I'm like, no. But I am going to make that an important issue, because it speaks to something more than just what happens after we die. It speaks to the nature and the character of God. And I am profoundly defensive about that. And so that was the first one. And then I think the second one, which was also speaking greatly to his nature, is what was the cross accomplishing? And so I don't want to get nerdy. Some of your listeners will be super theologically nerdy, and I'm with you, and then some won't. So I'll just say, like, for instance, the normal tradition that I grew up in faith-wise was we believed the atonement was what the technical term would be penal substitutionary atonement. Basically, and I'm saying this simplified, but basically, we screwed up, Dad's pissed, and he needs a pound of flesh.
Yeah.
And some might think I'm putting that harsh, but when you're a little kid, and that's kind of what I took from it. In my most naive, basic instincts as a kid was, I've from birth, just by being born, I've made God so angry that he can't look upon a part of me, my sin, unless he kills his son in my place. So sorry, Jesus, that from birth I caused you to have to go to the cross.
Yeah.
That rocked my world as a kid and I think I'm like, the last thing I'd want to do is be another catalyst for my Savior to go to a cross and be tortured because I deserved it. And I've been told I deserved it since birth. And God, in his, need to have his wrath appeased, sent Jesus to be the pound of flesh. And I just couldn't subscribe. And then I would hear messages about his grace and his love and his kindness. And I was like, well, okay, which is it? Because those two don't seem like they can coexist. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, no, it totally makes sense. As you were saying that, it reminded me of a conversation I had years and years ago with someone who had experienced severe emotional and physical abuse from his dad growing up. And he talked about how for him, that view of the cross that you just described really eloquently to him was like, listen, yeah, I'm going to save you, but I'm going to do it by torturing the hell out of my son. And he's like, no, thank you. I would prefer not to be a part of a God who's like that, because I grew up with that. And I want nothing to do with any sort of father figure that has that anger to him, that side to him. Yeah. And I had never really thought of it that way before. I grew up, I would think I was able to live in the dissonance. I was able to accept, like, I don't know, God's love and then just kind of like ignore the rest of it where that didn't really make sense or play out in all these different theologies until probably the last few years. But no, I think what you're saying, you said like people saying like, oh, so you would leave your church over that, you would do that, and it's like, well, no, it's not that I want to leave the church, it's that there's no room within our churches to question those things. I mean, and maybe maybe your church is different, I don't know, but I would say like there's been more than one person who said maybe we got hell wrong and has been basically kicked out of evangelicalism for it.
Well, and then you go to you get outside of your world, your pond, your bubble, whatever you want to call it, and then you realize, wait, there's other ways that are integrous to see God theologically, and there's like arguably the most ancient church we have is the Greek Orthodox Church, and there's some things theologically that I would respectfully disagree with, but then some of the ways they talk about hell, I go, that makes, and they've been preaching this since arguably longer than anybody's been preaching anything post-Christ about the doctrine of hell. And I'm like, man, I would have never known that there were a lot, like millions and millions of people in the Christian faith that believe in Jesus as God, who subscribe to some things that I was told was heresy, and they do it unapologetically. And it opens your eyes and your mind to go, there's a way bigger world out there, and we deserve, I always use this phrase, space and grace. I want to be a person in the second half of my life that gives everyone I come in contact with tons of grace, but also tons of space. And I think we're going to have in the near future, and it's already happening, but I think it's gonna hit a tipping point where it's going to be an overwhelming amount of young people that have to have space, or they're going to call bull on whatever expression they're a part of. And space will no longer be like the slippery slope to you losing your faith or to atheism, but instead it will be a spark that fans into flame, a new excitement for Jesus, because we're getting the freedom to go where we've been told it's too dangerous to go. And we're going to have freedom to ask all of those deeply embedded questions without having to have a midlife theological existential crisis. But instead, while your neural pathways are still forming and your brains are still forming, you're going to have some discipleship where there is space, and space is now of value. I think the grace part is already a no-brainer. You say that, but let's add some. It's like the prodigal son, Josh, for example. The father doesn't just give him his inheritance; he gives him space, right? Like, I see the inheritance metaphorically as grace. Like, I'm giving you what you don't deserve, and I could justifiably withhold this from you and even take you out of the will because you want to rebel and leave. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send you off with grace, and I'm going to bless this space that you need. And that space is going to reveal the futility in not having me in the picture. So that space is actually the most grace the dad could give him, even though the dad knew he was going to end up living with pigs and go through some really tough times. That space was essential to him coming back with a reconstructed view of who God really was, so then they could enjoy the mansion together.
It just feels like, and it feels like, as someone who has been the megachurch pastor himself, like, I look back now and I'm like, I think I was just so scared. I was so scared of like telling people the wrong thing, so scared of, I felt this responsibility, this pressure to create certainty, like you said. And it's like the weird thing of the last few years is realizing not only was that not my job, that's not even the goal. The goal was just to bring people to Jesus and then let them and Jesus work things out. I as a pastor, took way too much ownership over my responsibility to people's journeys.
I co-sign on that one. Same. And it's self-inflicted. It's self-inflicted. I don't blame anyone. I sure know moving forward, if God allows me to have some younger people in my life that I get to play a part in their life, I'm going to intentionally give them permission to not have to do all those things we felt as pastors that we had to do, but I just want people to have space and grace. I want people to doubt well. I want people to, there's such a gracious moment. It's one of my favorites with Jesus, and the classic moment where Thomas, after Jesus is resurrected, demands that he see Jesus's scars or he's not going to believe him to be God. And, here's why I'm not God, is because I would be so pissed and put out, and I literally just died the most brutal death, innocently died the most brutal death for your atonement's sake, for my love for you, Thomas, and now you're so entitled and you're demanding. But then you see Jesus' response, and it's so full of mercy and so full of space. It's like, please come and look, right? Here they are. There's no argument. There's no eye rolling. It's just, and then Jesus makes this incredible statement where he says, now, if Thomas needed to see to believe, how much more blessed are those who won't see and yet believe, which is all of us in 2020 that have a faith in Christ. And this is Jesus going, I'm not only granting you space, I'm blessing the space you need. It's sacred. Jesus is saying, listen, I am this kind to Thomas who makes who's more privy.
Yeah.
He's going to be more privy than 99.99999% of every human that will ever call themselves a Christian. He's more privy to the reality of my resurrection than next to anyone. And he's that entitled and demanding. And I have zero anger about it. I get it. And then so now in 2020, when you guys can't see God, God is unseen. You can't have coffee with God. You can't do a YouTube talk back and forth with God. How much more blessed are you when you believe in a God where doubt is essential for your faith to thrive? And
we have taught that story the exact opposite. What you just said is the exact opposite of how that story is normally presented. Normally it's presented as, can you believe this guy with his inability to believe? And then it's blessed are those people who aren't like this guy. Right. That's kind of how I've always heard that taught. And what I'm hearing you say right now is, no, it's creating permission for doubt, permission for struggle, permission to saying man, think about the people who can't get what Thomas just got and believe anyway. How great is that they managed to find faith? Not certainty, but faith. That's beautiful.
And I don't know how doubt's possible without faith.
Totally.
Right? It's the whole light and darkness thing. One feels, we're so dualistic in the Western world. It's dark, bad, light, good, faith, good, doubt, bad. And it's no, they're dance partners. One leads, one follows. One keeps it structured, one makes the dance beautiful, but they both need each other. And you have to let them, take it even a step further than Thomas. It's Jesus on the cross. Father, forgive them. He's given space to the people murdering him. Of course, we don't have that much divine capacity, but we are called, I believe, to give radical space to people wherever they're at. And Jesus knew something that no one could have known in the moment, which those Roman crucifiers are just in a system of oppression and a system of fear and control that all empires bring, that are going to cause them to think they're doing something noble while they're doing something awful. And Jesus has the capacity to go, I hate it. It's made me, it's literally killing me right now physically, but I understand that they are products of a deeply flawed and sinful, oppressive regime, and they think they're doing good. And so he gives them this space while they're literally murdering them, which is, God, please forgive them. They're clearly ignorant to where they've gotten to. And I want to be, it's going to take till I probably die. I'm just not a great human naturally, but I want to be that for people. And I think I'm fueled because I want that for myself. I want space to work out my salvation. And I want to do it honestly. And I want to do it without the pretense and unnecessary but very real peer pressure to act like I know more than I know. I just want to seek God because I think deeply in my gut he's really good and better than we've all made him out to be. And
well, the title of this YouTube channel, God is better than you think. It's so interesting because I think what I thought for a long time was that if you start asking the wrong questions, you end up on the slippery slope, like you said, of liberalism. And on that side, you get a lot of intellectual knowledge, but you don't really have a lot of experience with the presence, the power of God. You kind of become this, I don't know. And yet, in my experience of going on that journey, and as I hear you describing it, like, no, Jesus, not only is Jesus there, I'm experiencing him at a deeper level than I ever did before.
Yeah.
He's like more there in the questions, more there in the doubt. And I hear that coming out of you too. How are you experiencing that right now? Well,
I feel it's invigorating. It's rich. It's fun. It's exhilarating. What I mourn is a big portion of now, doing stuff like this is kind of my little way of coming out of the proverbial closet one step at a time. But what I mourn in all of this is something that has been this exhilarating to my faith. I've had to pretty much keep within the confines of a small community of people that I know my heart for Jesus and know my heart for the church. I mean, I love the church. I love Jesus. I love people. I love doctrine. I love theology. I just need a lot of space and a lot of acreage to do my work with it. You put me in a small stall, and I'm the wrong horse for that. I'll hurt some people on accident because I got to kick and I got to move and I got to run and I got to see the wide spaces that are God. And I've been that way my whole life, and I don't feel like I'm a rebel. It'll come across that way probably to some people, but I don't feel like I'm a rebel. I feel like I'm passionate about the nature of God. And I feel permission, 100% permission from God to spend my life like King Solomon. I'm reading Ecclesiastes. That's my reading right now in Scripture. And so it's fresh. But he literally unapologetically devoted his whole adult life to finding out who this God was. And he did it in ways that would have had him kicked out of an American evangelical church. Like he'd have been black. Like there wasn't enough space for him to go and test everything and hold on to the good. And he tested things like he tested a lot of bad, and I want to learn from him so I don't have to make some of those moral mistakes. We should all do that. But I do want the space and the attitude that he had, which is why I got this one life. I'm going to test it all, and I'm going to see what's good. Paul even would go on in the New Testament to say, test everything and then hold on to the good. Meaning you're going to get into some mess. If you're going to test stuff, you're going to be in some messes. And I don't think we give each other enough grace or permission or space to trust each other with messy places. We just say, stay away, get away, hide. And I'm like, no, we got to go there. And so even with what's going on in 2020 with the racial issues and all the political unrest and the divisiveness and how polarized everything is, we, as Christ followers, we should be the last group of people that are ducking our heads or burying our heads in the sand.
Yeah.
We should be unafraid of the hardest conversations with the hardest language, and we should be the kindest in those hard conversations.
We should have already trained ourselves to live in space.
Yeah.
We should be the people who know how to do that because we've been practicing it. We shouldn't, man, that's good. Because that's like, I mean, I come across, I'm sure, because you and I are wired somewhat similarly. I come across as a rebel, problem causer, and my temperament doesn't help. I get pissy, all that stuff. I really am trying, but it's not that I don't want like liberals to be in charge of everything or conservatives to be in charge of everything. I don't think that when it comes to racial reconciliation, there's a lot of easy answers. It's more of like, I just want us to acknowledge the path of Jesus, which is that life, if you are trying to buy into a worldly system of structure or power answers, it's going to be incomplete, and that we as Christians should be living in the space that is this path of Jesus, which is going to like probably pick and choose from a lot of different camps. It's going to have some of this, some of that, but then be this completely other third thing. And that other third thing's not like, it's not like a system or a set of facts that you ascribe to and then you know what the box is. It's a path of generosity. It's a path of grace. It's a path of forgiveness, of humility, of listening. And it's like, it's not like something that you wake up the next day and have an answer. You like wake up every day and try to become the person that God has created you to be.
So
and as you're talking, man, I'm like getting worked up because I'm like, yes. What you are talking about, Chad, is what I want for everyone. What would you say? There are so many people out there, and I'm hoping a lot of them watch this because it's kind of sort of for them. There are a lot of people who are either in churches right now and they have questions that they either consciously or subconsciously have been asking that they don't feel are safe to ask. And there are also people who, because of those questions, have left evangelical Christianity altogether. What would you want them to know?
I would want them to know that they are loved, that they need patience more than ever, because this too shall pass. These seasons are divine, and they're meant for something. I would a cautious warning that I'm preaching to myself now. Mm-hmm. A cautious warning. Let's use the popular term right now, deconstruction, right? Deconstruction, reconstruction. One of the rules I made in deconstructing that's been profoundly helpful, and I learned it from someone who had long deconstructed their faith and reconstructed it, and they kind of went through some, here's what I did right, here's what I did wrong. And I took it from them, and I've relentlessly applied this to my deconstruction, reconstruction phase of this, faith, which is I will always honor every season of my faith. Because when you're deconstructing, the natural pendulum effect is to everything before bad, everything new good. And neither of those two things are true.
Wow.
We're like, it's just neither of those two things are true. Like, everything on that side of the pendulum wasn't bad, and everything on the new pendulum, the side you've swung to now as a response, is not all good. And that's the goal. Isn't good or bad. The goal is, God, what are you up to right now? And so the thing that's helped me is I even did this morning. I constantly reflect on all of the good that my last season had and the season before that. And I was even this morning going back into my like late 20s, hyper Calvinistic. I only read John Piper and John MacArthur for, 3 or 4 years to learn,
the right answers to everything.
I refuse to just be embarrassed about that or apologize. Mm-hmm. Do I subscribe to a bulk of that theology? No. Did I mine some treasure and some gold from there that has made me the person I am today? 100%. So I'm not going to vilify that whole season. I'm not going to sacrifice the baby because I still don't like the stench of the bathwater from that season. Like the season you're in faith-wise almost always feels like it's all baby, no bathwater, and that's just not true. Mm-hmm. And then you get out of it, and then you're tempted to just see the bathwater because you brought the baby to the next phase, and it's like, no, it was a beauty. It was equal parts beauty. There's treasure and trash in every season, and the goal is trash gets put away, and the treasure we store for life. And so I would say to all the people that are listening, a lot of them probably in that deconstruction phase, is number one, there's nothing noble about deconstructing unless you have a goal of reconstructing. And I'm not going to tell you what reconstruction should look like. That's not my business. But I can say with some confidence that please commit to reconstructing. And that takes time, and it takes space, and it takes grace. But I just didn't want to be one of these scorned, everything sucks, everything was a lie, everything. That's just not true. So much of every season has been so beautiful. And just like this season, there's so much beauty in it. There's also trash. And so test everything, hold on to the good. You're not alone. As soon as I started talking about this publicly a little bit in conversations, I noticed way more people were asking the same questions I was.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you buy the car, all of a sudden you see it on the road everywhere. You know, it's just as soon as you buy that particular car, all of a sudden you notice them everywhere. And you didn't before. And it's like, as soon as I started going public with some of these questions, I was having and doubts of my faith. I started hearing, me too. Holy cow, me too. Me too. And it's been healing. And so
it's the first conversation you and I had.
Yeah. I remember sitting in the restaurant with you and feeling heard and seen and less alone.
Yeah, that's right. Same.
And if you get vilified for where you're at, I'm sorry, it sucks. And it's going to happen. There's going to be some people that aren't in a space to graciously let you be you. And I would put that more on where they're at in life than you feeling condemned or wrong about where you are. That's probably them being in a place where they need their own work, and they're not in a space to. Anytime, I'll put it this way, Josh, I'll put it on me. Anytime I'm in an unhealthy place in my soul and in my mind, I have next to no grace or space for people. And that's one of the ways I gauge my health is when I feel this like, you know, the highest form of it is every now and then I'll have a genuine love for my enemies, and I genuinely pray for them, and I mean it. And I feel serious about their life. That's the highest form of being healthy, because that's what Jesus did. He was the essence of it. He said, right, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. And I want to grow old and be one of those people that just did that. But that takes work, man. And it takes soul work, and it takes an intimacy with Christ, and then the fuel of the Holy Spirit to live that way. And this, to me, is the call of Christianity is man, the space and grace Jesus had for people is what brought everyone to him and had a bunch of people die for him. Mm-hmm. And I want to be one of those people.
Yeah.
And,
see, this is, sorry, go ahead, please.
Please go ahead.
I was going to say, this is what you just said is why I wanted us to talk. Because what I have seen in our brief interactions is someone who is living out that tension, deconstructing, whatever you want to call it. And yet at the same time, as I've watched you preach, as we've talked, I'm like, but you love Jesus and you are so passionately committed to your faith and calling other people to that as well. It's like actually possible to be a very serious follower of Jesus who is also asking a lot of really hard questions and living in the tension. And I want people to know and see that so badly. I want them to know that that's possible. Why is God better than we think he is?
Because he called us good before he called us anything else. And he does. I don't believe God does anything arbitrarily. And so the first utterance of God's nature towards humanity that we get, if you subscribe at all to the Bible in any type way, the foundational message right out of the gates is everything's good. You're good. You're good. This is all good. Which because he's the author, he's good. And I want to spend my life putting that to the test. And I know God's unafraid of his goodness and having that scrutinized and tested. Taste and see that the Lord is good, right? You still got to taste. You still got to see. You still got to put pressure up against God's nature and against real life to let him show you that. But I believe if you stick to it and you go through the highs and the lows and the hills and the valleys and all of in between, you are going to continually have reaffirmed God's goodness. For all of the tough times I've gone through and the suffering and the difficulty, even right now in life, God just keeps settling up on his goodness. And so I want to restore in this age too. And I'm already hearing rumblings of it. But I'm feeling the Holy Spirit of God compelling me to bring back in the gospel narrative the doctrine of original goodness. Like why we started with original sin as the foundational principle of the gospel, other than to manipulate people into saying, me bad, God good, please help me, which that is an aspect of the gospel that is fundamental. I'm not trying to get rid of that, but I'm saying if we just stuck to systematic theology, how could we possibly take God's goodness towards us out of the system? Like there is an inherent goodness that you don't hear talked about on the front end of the Christian faith. And I think that does a great disservice to people. And the reason I think that is because it did a great disservice to me. Because you feel like a piece of crap long enough, it does some really dysfunctional, dangerous things to humans. And I don't want to be a part of that. And so God is better than we think, because the very first thing out of his mouth is, this is all good, and you are profoundly and deeply at your core good. And I am so committed to your goodness that when things do go bad, which look around, I don't think we have to make a strong case, the doctrine of sin. But when things go bad, I'm going to show you how good you are, in that I'm going to come and I'm going to come to this earth in the flesh, sit with you in the mess. I'm going to sit with you for 33 years, and I'm going to solve it in 3 days. And I think that alone right there says something about God. I'm going to sit with you for 33 years in the mess, because I want you to know that I know what it's like to be you. And then I can fix it I can do it however I want. So I'll do that in like 3 days, but I'm going to sit with you for 30 years, 3 decades. And and then the book of Hebrews says that so we could have a high priest who would empathize with our weaknesses. So we could approach him with confidence to receive what? Grace and mercy in our time of need. That is a good God. And I love I think it's Brian Zahnd, one of the pastors that I've listened to in this kind of season of doubt and deconstruction, who's been extremely helpful, because he's 20 some years on the other side of it. But he said God didn't send Jesus to convince us about him. He sent Jesus to convince us how much God loves us. I'm butchering it. I wish you could edit that out.
Oh, I can. The question is, will I?
I just butchered that so bad.
No, I get it.
Like, God didn't send Jesus to convince God. He sent Jesus to convince us how good God is.
Yeah.
He didn't.
Yeah.
Jesus didn't come to say, "Please, Dad, don't hurt them all. Please stop. No, Dad, don't." It's Jesus coming down and saying, "I'm going to show you how bad sin can go, because your sin is going to be willing to put the Savior of the earth on the cross. But I'm not coming to condemn you. I'm coming to save you." That's John 3:17, right?
Well, what does that say about us then? It's like we're worth saving. I mean, it's like, it's not just like, oh, look how good God is. It's that, like, I mean, that's kind of the whole premise of, like, and we could really go on a tangent here, but if you compare like the Genesis creation narrative to the ones happening around the time that is created, it's like in the Genesis creation story, humans matter. Human life matters. It's sacred. It's beautiful. And God's intent toward it is good. Yeah. And it's like that alone. It's like, no, your life matters. You are of high worth to God.
Yeah.
He thinks you're special. I mean, that's pretty cool. If that was actually true, that would be pretty good news, huh? Right. I do have 2 final questions for you, though. The first one is, let's say that people want more Chad Bruegman in their life. They are watching this and they're like, I like this guy. I want more. How do they get more of you in their life?
That's a great question.
Hey, thank you.
I have been more secluded and on an island than I ever have before. And that's a lot of it's been strategic. I'm kind of getting over it. I'm feeling froggy again. But my social media, you can follow me. half of it won't be inspirational at all. I do a lot of family stuff on Instagram. My youngest kid, my 5-year-old, people on Instagram have fallen in love with him. So I post a lot of him just being him. Twitter is crazy. Half of you will love me for what I post. Half of you will not like me. I love you no matter what. And Facebook I stay off there as much as possible. I'm on there, but that's the one.
Lurking in the background and then forcing yourself to get off when you feel yourself getting angry.
Hardest for me, but I'm honestly, it feels kind of nice because the last 20 years have been me flying. I don't have a book to plug. I don't have a particular platform or anything that I'm on consistently. I guest teach at churches right now. And I'm kind of COVID unemployed, like a lot of people. And so prayer's appreciated.
So what I would say is if you have an opportunity to employ Chad, you should please reach out to him.
Shameless plug. But if you follow me on social media and I don't annoy you, I would love to have you a part of that platform because most days I thoroughly enjoy it.
And then last question for you. For those people who are watching, who are the praying types, how can they be praying for you?
Great question. My future, I want to do my second half really well of life. One of the beauties in getting older is you appreciate days more than you did when you were younger. They feel a little more special, and I feel less entitled to anything. And so I want to do the second half well. I'm getting slower and older and uglier. And to compensate for that, I'd like to get wiser. What a shame to get slower and older and uglier and at least not add some things. And so I need wisdom beyond my years. I want to steward this deconstruction, reconstruction well. And I want to have a ministry, whatever that looks like, where people feel so safe around me, whether they're gay, straight, Muslim, Christian, Hindu, atheist. I don't care. I just want humans that bear the image of God to feel grace and to feel space when they're with Chad and Rachel Bruegman and the Bruegman family. And I'm so open to what God does. So I'll take your prayers for my future, that the Bruegman family would be agents of space and grace.
Well, for what it's worth, Chad, even as you have deliberately limited your platform, which I think is smart, after building one pretty successfully for a couple decades, even in your seclusion, even as you let God work stuff out in you, you are still being used as a pastor to pastor people other through this. And I know that because that's part of what you've done for me. So thank you for being you, man. Thank you for your transparency and honesty, not just in this interview, but in every time I've ever seen you. And I'm excited. I'm excited to see what God does with all this, man, because I think it's going to be something pretty exciting.
I hope so.
All right, man.
I love that. I really appreciate you, Josh. I love your heart. You're super smart. That's one thing I love about you. When I watch what you write and read some of the stuff you've written and stuff, I hope it's a lot more. I hope you get way more opportunities to write. You're also obviously very articulate, but when you write, there's something special there. So keep writing, man. We need to hear it.
That's kind of you.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to hit the stop recording button.